Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over 10 years, we've produced weekly episodes featuring epic tales of tech support and troubleshooting, discussions about managing our clients and businesses, and interviews with colleagues and vendors. For our pro listeners, we offer Patreon-exclusive shows. This private podcast feed is tailor-made for IT professionals looking for advice and guidance on the more challenging aspects of running your practice, working with your clients and employees, and managing your fleets of devices. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll unlock a world of deeper Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a shared passion for Apple technology. Simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now on to the show. Welcome to Command Control Power. We are pleased to be joined this week by Thomas Reed of TheSafeMac.com and also AdwareMedic, two sites that many of our colleagues, I'm sure, have been to recently with the recent sort of influx of adware on the Mac in these Safari extensions and other sources. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, thank you.
We're going to do a deep dive into what was the genesis of the site initially and what your thoughts are and why all of a sudden we have sort of a recent rash of browser bugs that sort of put adware on our machines. But you mentioned on your site that you got started in Mac in 1984. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got introduced to Apple and your progression?
Yeah, I actually I was introduced to the Mac in 1984. I was a teenager at the time, and my dad brought home a Mac 128K. So for the folks, the real old timer sort of Mac folks, that's the very first one. And I was used to these, command line computers at the time, and I had never seen a mouse before. I'd never seen a graphical interface, and it just wowed me. I was blown away. And basically that's where, everything started. I fell in love with the Mac at that moment and never looked back.
Yeah, there was something really compelling about that first generation of Macs that got people really excited. Not only the screen being a lot friendlier in terms of the type fonts that they used, but just the resolution itself, and it just really just drew you in.
It did.
Yeah, I think we might be contemporaries, and I felt the same way, age-wise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big question is, do you still have that model?
Yes. Do you still have your original Mac, Tom?
I don't. It actually was not. That original one was not mine. It was provided by my dad's business. So, that eventually went back, and we got. We had a variety of different Macs over the years, but I unfortunately don't actually own any of those at this point in time.
So did your professional career take you into working with Macs on a regular basis, or you would kind of classify yourself as sort of the uber geek home enthusiast?
A little bit of both. I did do some Mac support work for a university early in my career. I was working for a department at the university that was all Mac. So I was in charge of about 50 plus Macs and all the various accessories that went with them. That was back in the 90s, sort of during Apple's low period, unfortunately. And then it was back then that I quit and became a stay-at-home dad. And so since then, it's mainly been a labor of love, as you'd say, a hobby in my downtime. But in more recent years, I've been trying to turn it into more of a real business than a hobby.
Mm-hmm. And you started, I guess, the TheSafeMac back in 2011 was the sort of
right, yeah,
birth of that site.
I started it. It sort of had a number of regenerations over the years, but yeah, when I finally started really truly blogging was back in 2011. And I think some of the first things that I talked about were the things like the Mac Defender epidemic. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. it infected a lot of people. It wasn't as big as the flashback epidemic that I'm sure most people know about, but it was pretty big at the time.
Yeah, it warranted an Apple Knowledge Base article.
Yeah. And that sort of started Apple's more specific focus on malware as well. It was not too long after that they started with things like X-Protect, which protects your Mac against malware and stuff like that. All these security features built into the operating system sort of had their genesis back then in 2011, and probably a little earlier too. I don't have any inside knowledge, but that seems to be about when it started. So,
if you don't mind me jumping back to the earlier days when you started out, you said you were in charge of about 50 Macs. Did you have any sort of support staff with you, or was it just you?
It was pretty much just me. Within that department, there were IT guys for the university as a whole that I worked with, but for just those Macs, it was pretty much just me in charge of all of them.
Did you have anybody to lean on when things got tough? If you had answers or questions that you couldn't answer?
Not really. I mean, when it came to things like networking issues, then I'd call the IT guys. But for anything else, I was pretty much on my own. I had to figure things out as I went along. I had to build a lot of systems from scratch because they didn't have a whole lot in place when I got there. They needed calendars, they needed backups, they needed basically everything you could think of to take them from being just a bunch of computers in the same building to really truly working together.
And what were some of the tools back in that time period that you kind of drew upon? Were you using something like Brew for backup?
At the time, I was using Retrospect, which was very nice. It went through a down period for a while there. I think it was changed hands a couple times.
Many.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all have a love-hate relationship with Retrospect.
Yeah, but at the time, it was wonderful. We backed up all those Macs remotely over the network to a tape drive on a central server, which was also a Mac. So
back then, that was pretty impressive. Then,
yeah, and that was back in the early '90s. So it was pretty primitive back then compared to what we have now. So
there was a good time for Retrospect back then. I mean, we've joked about it a couple of times, but it did have a really strong point when it was a solid backup product for a good long while.
Yeah, and I think that was when I was using it because it was really great at that time, and then I heard that it didn't do so well later. But I wasn't using it anymore by that point. So,
well, I was asking you about your support mechanisms back then because, a site like yours, like TheSafeMac.com, it's a resource for people. So people can find information about, and we'll talk about Adware and stuff like that. And it's just, I always find it interesting to ask people, especially in the earlier days of support, what kind of mechanisms you had to support yourself, whether it be some other technician in another department or what have you, because now we have things to turn to. Like we can go to the SafeMac and do some research and find out some more information. But back then, who knew?
Yeah, back then the web was a very different place, and there really weren't very such a variety of sites like there are now. I was relying on things like internet forums, Usenet groups, stuff like that, and that you guys probably know that's not a very good source of information. So. A lot of it just came from lots of experimentation and experience.
I can imagine.
And over time, in terms of the Mac that you would have at home to sort of call upon, you pretty much stayed up to date with the OSs as they sort of rolled along.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't think there were too many that I skipped.
Mm-hmm.
So...
And so what led you to coming out with the first take us a little bit in the history of the SafeMac. What was the first impetus that sort of drove you to write the first software removal script?
Well, I had written an adware removal guide on the SafeMac, and that was really getting a lot of traffic. But the problem with it was that it was all manual removal instructions. So, it basically consists, and it's still there, it consists of a lot of, path names to files, the full path to a file, and you have to go and find that file and delete it. I had a lot of people who had trouble with that. I'd get questions from people saying, I don't know how to find these files, or I've gone looking for them and they're not there. When they had, very plain symptoms that they had the adware in question. So I started to realize that these manual instructions were great for some people, but they really didn't fit the bill for everybody. So I finally decided to write some kind of a script, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at first. And I finally settled on AppleScript because it's pretty readable. It's easy to write, and I felt like it would be fairly, easy for somebody who really doesn't know a whole lot about programming to look at the code and say, okay, this looks like it's okay. Because I liked the idea of making sure that people could see how it worked.
That's an important factor to consider. I mean, a lot of people that develop software or a script, they may not take that into account. And people looking into that might say, well, I'm not sure I've downloaded it from this site. I'm not sure what I'm going to run here. But you considered the fact that AppleScript was human readable, so to speak, enough for people to understand.
Yeah. And, that's the thing is in the Windows world, if you go looking for adware removal tools, you'll get dozens, and probably most of them are going to install adware or malware on their own.
True.
A lot of
That's very true.
They're just baiting you in to try to get you to download it and install it. And I wanted to differentiate myself from that. I didn't want to be, one of those. I wanted to make sure that people knew that they could trust it. So that was the key thing.
Yeah, especially when you're just starting out before you build that reputation.
Yeah.
And for us as consultants, of course, the fact that you've scripted this just makes it so much easier. I mean, I had often referred to the guide that you had and gone through and manually had to remove all this malware. But the fact that you can make it easy for us really resonates with our work because it just makes it that much smoother and faster to get the clients back in business. So in terms of you kind of being keeping up to date and sort of being aware of new pieces of adware that are coming out there, about how often would you say, well, let's talk about this a little bit. Let's talk about the separate site that you launched off of the SafeMac.
Okay. Yeah, the AdwareMedic site.
How new is that, and what sort of brought you to creating that site?
That's really only about 3 weeks old now, a little bit more than 3 weeks. And what happened was I eventually got to a point where, with my old adware removal AppleScript, it started to hit the ceiling of what it could do because it was written in AppleScript. There were, certain things that it was hitting, running into some false positives, meaning that it was removing legitimate files instead of adware files, or, it couldn't reliably identify certain things because it couldn't look deeply enough into the file formats. And so it was really starting to become a bit cumbersome and a bit less and less reliable as I was asking more and more of it. So I finally decided that I really needed to write it as a real app instead of as an AppleScript. And so I hammered out a whole bunch of code and came out with this app that I had in beta for a little while under a slightly different name, AdwareMedic, which I found out only after the fact that there's actually a company called AdwareMedic, so that didn't work out so well. That one didn't turn up when I did a trademark search or when I did a Google search. But after my app started getting a little bit of attention, then that site rocketed up to the top of Google's search. So I imagine they're probably thanking me a little bit now, but I figured a lawsuit was coming, so I decided to make it AdwareMedic. But so, yeah, now the app is, fully, it's released. It's not in beta anymore, and it's on version 1.0.4 now. So it's been getting very regular updates. I've added a lot of new adware to the signatures, so it's really progressing very well, I think.
And it's donationware, so people are free to use it without having to pay anything. But of course, your contribution to the community is extremely generous, and so we obviously encourage people to pony up.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. Yeah, I thought it was kind of important that I made sure that it was free for people to use. I didn't want to be one of those people that makes a utility that tells you, oh, you have all these things wrong, now pay me to fix it. So I really wanted it to be free. I wanted people to be able to download it freely, use it, remove their problems freely. The donations really, I was not expecting a whole lot out of them, and I was very pleasantly surprised. It's looking like I might actually be able to make this into a real business now, and that means that's great for the customers too, because that means better tech support. I'll be able to devote more time to this, and definitely means it's not going away anytime soon too. I'm going to be working on this for quite a while, I think.
Well, that's excellent to hear. I mean, yeah, I can understand you being concerned about, or not concerned necessarily, but thinking, well, who's really going to pay for donationware? But it's nice to see that people in the Mac community are actually saying, this is a good service. I want to contribute to this. And it helps with, like you said, the development of your business and developing the app itself into a better product.
Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely very surprised, very pleasantly surprised. So
well, I think possibly one reason that your customers are more inclined to pay is that a lot of times it's trying to get stuff for free that got them into the mess in the first place.
Right.
That's actually a good point.
Very true. Yeah.
I'll pay anything. Just get rid of Genio, please.
Yeah. And what I like too on the SafeMac site is it takes the form of a blog, and people one comment sort of baited you into giving your opinion on MacKeeper, and you didn't really pull any punches and pretty much stated plain out that you thought it was a scam. And it's just amazing that program still proliferates, and we're constantly surprised by not only going to residential sites but going to business sites and seeing MacKeeper in somebody's Finder menu. It's just like staggering how much of a impact that program has had on Mac users in a negative way.
It goes to show you what aggressive marketing can do.
Truly aggressive.
Yeah, it's true. And people are really shocked that, this thing that purported to, speed up their Mac really made things worse. Like they just think it's the last thing they would suspect. They call and say, my Mac is slow. I don't know what's going on. And, oh, by the way, I installed this thing recently. It happened after that, but it can't be related.
Yeah, because it was supposed to speed it up. So.
Exactly. Slow Mac.
And Thomas, what would you attribute within the last, I would say 12 to 18 months, sort of the influx of more adware on the Mac, and specifically seeing it manifested in the Safari browser?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's always been a problem in the Windows world, and as the Mac gains more and more attention and more market share, I think more and more hackers are interested in creating these sorts of programs for the Mac. It's kind of proven to be a little bit difficult so far for hackers to create malware for the Mac. There is malware out there, don't get me wrong, but Apple seems to be doing a pretty good job of keeping it under control using the anti-malware technologies in macOS 10. So given that it's difficult to write a piece of malware that is widespread and doesn't get shut down almost immediately, it makes a lot of sense for these hackers to turn their energies to different projects that are a little bit less illegal, less, and so they go to Adware, which is, technically it's not malware. It is very unethical, but it is not illegal, so they can get away with it. And Apple doesn't seem to want to cross that line to removing Adware. So it just makes, we've got this escalating problem of Adware because it's easy to create. It's not getting removed by anything. And people just don't know where to turn. So I think it's going to be a worsening problem for a while.
What do you think makes it easier to create? Has anything changed recently? I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is the Safari extensions, platform. Yeah. The fact that you can download and install Safari extensions is definitely. It's very important because, I have some Safari extensions that I wouldn't want to try and live without. But at the same time, it's a big problem because malicious code can make some very significant changes very, very easily through that mechanism. So actually, most of the adware that's been appearing lately has been in the form of Safari extensions, Chrome extensions, and Firefox extensions.
Can you speak at all to the creators of some of this stuff? Have you ever done any kind of internet sleuthing and found out where Genio came from and what its genesis was?
Well, I don't really know a whole lot about its genesis. In the case of Genio, I have had quite a few dealings with the company behind it. There's an actual company behind it. It's located in Israel, and they are very, very aggressive about their marketing. They're very defensive of their product. They call it a newspaper-styled homepage, and they claim that they have many satisfied users. I have not met one yet, but
me neither.
But okay, but yeah, they actually seem to think that I am the primary person responsible for their software becoming more detected by antivirus software.
Really,
it's not really. It's not. A lot of antivirus software doesn't detect it at all, but it's becoming more and more detected by more antivirus software. They seem to think I'm responsible for that because of what I've written about Genio on TheSafeMac, and they have had some not too pleasant things to say to me over the couple of years that they've been around. But hey, I'm here to expose that sort of thing.
So what is the reach? I mean, without you, compromising any of your confidentiality, have they threatened you with libel, or are they saying that they have some sort of U.S. presence where they can sort of pursue this in a legal fashion?
Yeah, I don't know what their U.S. presence is. They did at one point threaten to sue me if I didn't remove all stuff from TheSafeMac. And I sort of called them on it. I did not take anything off my site. And so they turned around and they said, "Oh, that was the fault of one of our new people. He did that without authorization." Okay, yeah, sure. I'm sure that it was done to try to get me to take stuff down without asking a question. And they kind of made the mistake of doing it in a comment on my blog, so out in public where everybody could see it.
Wow.
So that was kind of a mistake, I think. But since then, I really haven't heard anything from them. So all seems to be good.
But they still continue to proliferate. They're not. They're
You're having trouble with that word tonight.
But I mean, they're not going away, and
Right.
there seems to we see more of it. I would say within the last 6 months, whereas prior to that, it was occasional that we would see it at client sites, but now it seems to be more and more prevalent. I mean, I could think alone in the past 14 days, I've probably had an instance to use your removal tool maybe 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I think all of this stuff is becoming more and more prevalent. I probably actually see less Genio infections now than I did 6 months ago myself, but not because they're falling off, I don't think, but more because other things are becoming more prevalent, like conduit and downlight. And there are a whole host of other small ones that just install browser extensions. Conduit and downlight are a couple other examples that get more invasive. Conduit will actually modify your Firefox browser if you have it installed. So if you get infected with that one, you've got to delete Firefox and re-download it.
And what is the payoff for them? I mean, it's click-through bait? Is that basically what?
Yeah, basically, they just are trying to make advertising revenue, and in some cases it could be they may have an affiliate system, and so some hacker somewhere says, "Oh yeah, I think I can make some money by creating a Genio affiliate and using it to show ads, to find a way to get it on users' computers and show ads." And so these people then get paid. Genio gets paid because they're showing the ads. Somebody's paying them to display the ads. The affiliates get paid by Genio or by these other companies to help promote this adware, to get it on the users' computers.
I think it's even possible to, I'm sorry, Thomas, but to change the inline links even to something like an Amazon link, to change it to someone's affiliate link, just for any instance of an Amazon
Absolutely,
link.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And adware isn't the only problem out there. There have been a lot of hacks of wireless routers lately. So you might have an adware like problem, and it turns out that it's actually not adware at all. It's actually in your router. Sometimes your internet service provider's domain name servers will get compromised.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, it's usually for phishing attacks, but it can also be used to serve adware or advertising.
And have you seen any recent evidence of any kind of botnets that are manifesting themselves on Macs, or is that still pretty difficult to do?
Not really, no. Botnets would go more towards real real malware. And there was a surge in Mac malware for a while there, back around the time of Flashback. But this year, we really haven't seen all that much. There have really only been 3 new families of malware that have appeared this year. There's Lao Shu, which it appeared in I think January, and then Coin Thief, which was made to steal bitcoins from your computer, which appeared I think in February. And then very recently, like in the last month, we saw this new piece of malware that was ported over from Linux called XSL command. But, I mean, that's it. 3 new families of malware in all of this year. So that's not very significant. To be sure, there are botnets out there. There are Mac botnets out there. There are infected Macs that actually have real malware on them. But it's fairly rare these days. Adware is really, really taking over. Instead of malware, like back in 2012, early 2013, it was really malware that was the big problem, and now it's adware. So,
do you think this just goes in cycles, or it's more that adware is low-hanging fruit, it's much easier to deploy, and just less resources for the hack?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Actually, it's just, they're going after the low-hanging fruit. They're using techniques that are easy, techniques that antivirus companies don't seem to be that interested in blocking. And that's really the key. I think is when somebody puts out a new piece of malware, the security companies are all over it. The antivirus software, gets their definitions updated very quickly, as soon as they find it anyway. And so everybody who's running antivirus software is protected. Apple typically will get some kind of protection into the system fairly quickly, not always as quickly. Sometimes they beat the antivirus companies and sometimes they don't. So when you've got actual malware, it really gets jumped all over by all these companies to really get rid of it and stop it. They really don't seem to be that interested in adware, though. So, Genio probably has the most detections of any adware, but even so, you'll find plenty of antivirus engines that don't detect it as anything. And a lot of them don't actually detect it as malware. They just detect it as a potentially unwanted application. So when you've got these security companies ignoring the problem, and you've got a less illegal activity, because really adware, there's nothing illegal about it. It's just a browser extension that technically you probably agreed to in the installer, of whatever you installed. So, it makes it a lot easier. Nobody's going to be removing it. None of these antivirus companies are going to be removing it. Nobody's going to be getting prosecuted for it. So it's easier. It pays off more reliably, and it's just the way to go for these hackers these days.
Not to mention Google is just paving the way for them, because we've all had clients try and install Adobe Flash and fail, but it seems like an equal number succeed in downloading the wrong version and installing Genio, basically. Thanks to some poisoning of Google results. But it's not poisoning in the strict sense, because it seems like Google has no problem, continuing to collect ad revenue and just posting these sites. And just to clarify, I'm speaking about, as we all probably know, if you Google install Adobe Flash, you get, the top result is this adobe-flash.onfreedownload.com. It's like, no harm there. Let's go to that site.
Seems legit.
Yeah, it seems legit. And then if you look in the lower right, it does say, Genio automatically designs and generates your own personal online magazine, yada, yada, yada. So they're talking about Genio, but of course the rest of the, text is all relating to Adobe Flash and how you can just get this wonderful Flash player. I would love to hear your thoughts on how they get away with this, and how this is just continuing to exist here.
Honestly, I think it's just because it hasn't caught the right people's attention yet, and I don't know how that is. I know I've tried to bring it to Apple's attention. I'm no stranger to their product security team. I've sent them many samples of malware over the last few years. But they have never responded about any of the adware that I've sent them. And I've sent them a bunch, and I've sent them emails saying, here's a description of the unethical behavior, the borderline illegal behavior of this particular kind of adware. Can we please get, a block in Xprotect so that, users aren't installing it and don't hear anything back and nothing ever happens. So I don't know why it's not getting the attention that it seems like it deserves. I think that one potential stumbling block is that technically, when you install something and it has adware in it, there's a license agreement somewhere in there that you probably clicked I agree or something like that. So it makes it a more borderline case where, if you're Apple and you're removing some software that somebody out there might think is desirable, somebody might be able to make the case that, well, this makes the software that you downloaded free. Without it, you'd have to pay. Somebody might think that's a valid argument. So when you're a big company like Apple with deep pockets, you start getting into removing that sort of stuff, and you could potentially get sued for a lot of money. And I think that's probably where we are right now, is that nobody really wants to be the first one to jump on this at a very high level and stomp it out, because they don't want to potentially be in the way of the lawsuits. But that's just a guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that speaks to the other avenue that Apple has, which is to just prevent the installer from even running, because these installers run without even prompting. I mean, it's not like it's saying this is an unidentified developer. It's saying it doesn't even ask. I mean, it just, it runs because... Yeah,
you open it. Well, the problem is that most of the adware that's getting installed these days is packaged up in a signed app.
Right.
So for those of your listeners who aren't familiar with this, the way things work on the Mac these days is there are three places three sources for software. One is the Mac App Store, which, all those apps are vetted, they're sandboxed, so they're pretty secure. And they really can't do a whole lot malicious to your system. Then there are apps that are from identified developers. And what that really means is that the developer has registered with Apple and has obtained a cryptographic certificate that they can use to sign their app. And that means that, you can, when you open the app, basically the signature tells the system whether or not that app has been modified and whether it's actually the app that it should be according to the developer, this registered developer. So those are the next level of safety. And then, of course, there are the unidentified developers, which, there are some good apps by unidentified developers, people who didn't register with Apple, but those are obviously the most dangerous. So the issue is these identified developers, most people will trust those kinds of apps, and that's exactly what all these adware installers are. They're all registered with Apple. They have a valid developer ID, a valid cryptographic certificate to sign their app with. If Apple wanted to, and they've done this with malware before, they could just say, okay, this certificate is no longer valid. We revoke this certificate, and all of a sudden that installer would stop working everywhere. But they have not done that for any adware that I've sent to them so far.
Right, and I think it probably is in large part due to the reasons you described, where it's more of a judgment call because yes, it is bad for 99.9% of users, but those users, if they had read what they were installing, they were informed of what it was going to be, and they could have, chosen not to install it. It's not malware, per se. It's something that's just going to add a little, flash ad to every page you visit or something like that.
Right.
It's not exactly going to, harm your computer surreptitiously. So
yeah,
I see where they're coming from. But it also seems to me, the other sort of like pet topic that I always bring up is just that these things are getting better, but they're just like always one step away from looking legit to any kind of trained eye. Like the site I'm looking at says Adobe Flash Player non-IE is the in parentheses there, and it says compatible with Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8. That's the logo that it shows, but it is the Mac version that downloads. There's just a lot of like red flags about it, and then the other one that you download has the Firefox logo when you actually run the installer. For whatever reason, it has nothing to do with Firefox. It's actually Flash Player, and it says Flash, but it shows the Firefox logo. So it's just like really bizarre stuff. And if they were, what'll happen eventually is they'll just get better and better, and it'll be really very difficult to tell, even for a trained user, what you're actually downloading.
Yeah, it often is difficult to tell these days. Some of these installers, they are becoming a little bit more professional looking and a little more convincing. And you've got places like download.com and Softonic that, a lot of users think that those are reputable download sites, and yet they will wrap other people's software in an adware installer, and that's what you get. And so, those are big sites with a lot of budget. They can make an installer that looks, very professional, and yet it's installing adware behind the scenes. And then worse is, you've also got legitimate programs that are starting to show ads. I think one of the most prominent that I can think of is the Avast antivirus software. Recently was found to have a feature that's enabled by default in their Avast online security browser extension that directs, if you go on Amazon.com with this particular extension installed, and you're looking, it doesn't just come up all the time. It's when you're looking at specific products. If it finds a better price somewhere else, it will display a banner across the top of the page directing you to some other site. And I'm not sure how they get away with that. I would think Amazon would be pretty mad about that. But, yeah, as far as I know, it's still in there.
That's interesting. I mean, so many Mac users are just unsuspecting, too, because they've been living in this dream world of nothing ever affecting them, or thinking nothing ever affects them, rather. And so they're not even looking for things like that. I mean, we have the trained eye to look for that. As Joe mentioned, some of those installers are pretty obvious to us, but they just don't consider their Macs to be susceptible to anything. Yeah. So that's the downside as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
It's very seductive for these users because, again, as Sam well pointed out, we just don't go to those sites, and we just see we can scan through Google results very, very quickly, and we know what to click on and what not to. But most people don't, and they're just sort of sucked in, and we have to sort of be there for them, and you're using your product and just trying to get them back on steady ground again. Where do you see things going? I mean, if you had a crystal ball in front of you in terms of, do you think this is going to continue to escalate for the Mac, and that you're going to have your hands full and you're going to be doing revs to the program every week, adding more malware to remove or adware? Or
I think it is going to get worse for a while. The question in my mind is for how long. Already I've added quite a few. I've gone through, let's see, I think I'm on the 19th version of the signature file for AdwareMedic. So that, the signature file has all the definitions of what's adware and where to look for it. And sometimes I'll add, 3 or 4 new things in a week. So it's really, I think I have 23 in there, 23 different families of adware, so to speak.
Wow.
So I think it's definitely going to be getting worse for a while. At some point, it's going to become a big enough problem that some bigger players are likely to get involved. Some of the antivirus companies, potentially Apple themselves. At that point, that's going to be great for the user. Probably not so great for me, because I'm sure that at some point down the road here, I'm going to find that somebody else is blocking the adware before my app even has a chance to look for it. So, but that's great for the user, and I honestly, I'm not looking for for that not to happen just because I happen to have an app that's looking for adware. I would really like to see Apple step in, or somebody step in, as long as it was a real true effort to get rid of the adware.
It reminds me of the antivirus companies who, employ hackers to create viruses to necessitate the need for their software.
Yeah,
that's of course a rumor. I don't think that's actually true, but yeah, you could always leverage all the knowledge you've gained over the years in how to remove these things, by sell your skills to some of the back to Genio maybe.
I don't think they'll have them after all this.
Right.
Yeah.
And Thomas, looking at your keen awareness of what's out there, and let's assume for a moment that you were doing Apple consulting like we do every day, would you actually recommend to any of your clients to use any kind of antivirus software, or would you still say that's belt and suspenders?
I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I think it depends on the individual. The problem with the antivirus software is that a lot of it will cause you problems. There's a lot of bad antivirus software out there. There's a lot of antivirus software out there that is almost a scam. I know of at least a couple that really don't detect anything. They might detect 1 or 2 things, and that's about it.
Or it's false positives.
Yeah, I know of some that have bad problems with false positives. So there's one that I know of that will detect, and has since like 2009, it will sporadically detect a particular system file as being malicious. So that's bad.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
Right.
So on the one hand, the antivirus software can cause you some serious problems. It also really doesn't help you very much against adware. Right. Because like I've said, most adware is not really very well detected by most antivirus software. And even if you've got something installed that detects one particular piece of adware, it may not find all the components of that adware. So you go to tell your antivirus software to remove it, and it may remove most of it, but you may still have some little bits and pieces hanging out here doing something weird in the background. But on the other hand, you've got a lot of very inexperienced users out there who could very well get themselves into some trouble. So it's kind of a balancing act. How much trouble are you willing to risk versus how much trouble are you going to get yourself into with the antivirus software? I generally recommend these days ClamXAV. You guys are probably familiar with that one. It's a free open source antivirus engine made by a guy named Mark Allen. That's probably the best one these days because it really doesn't cause you any problems. In my testing, it detects all the malware that's out there for the Mac. And it's a great open source project. It's great to support open source projects. So if you're going to do antivirus software, that's probably the one that I would recommend.
And you can get that through the Mac App Store too, I believe. not only through his
Correct.
site, but also through the store.
You can get it through either the Mac App Store or the clamxav.com site. There are a few things that I think it'll do if you download it outside the App Store that the App Store version can't do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are fairly minimal. So, the App Store version is definitely a good one to go for because you can trust it. And it's also a donationware project. So, I definitely like Mark Allen. I like the guy who's behind it. He's a good guy, and I would support him 100%.
And you recommended going to softonic.com, right, to get that, Thomas? Is that what you said?
Definitely not.
Strike that from the record, Joe.
Also, one thing that people should be aware of if they do go looking for it, avoid clamxav.org because that site, at one point in time, I know it was owned by Zeobit, the developers of MacKeeper.
Wow.
And at one point it had a fake review for clamxav, and when you went to click on the download button, you'd get MacKeeper instead.
Oh, man.
I don't know who owns it now, and I don't think that it doesn't still have the MacKeeper affiliation, but it's still not a trustworthy site. So you've got to make sure you go to the .com or go to the App Store.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, we do encourage people to go to TheSafeMac.com and also AdwareMedic.com and support your product and support what you do, because I think your contribution to the community is very, very generous. And hats off to you, Thomas. I mean, we thank you as consultants. This has been a great asset for us. And
I'm glad I could help.
And it's very exciting too to just meet the man behind the website. So this is gives us a good sort of glimpse into what you do, and your intentions are true, and we support that. So it's been great having you on this evening.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I